Hey, it's Cole from Cole's Quilt, and I finally finished all the blocks of the Baby Dragon quilt along. And what I'm going to be showing you in this video is what we do with the paper. So if you've never done foundation paper piecing, you saw that we sew everything onto the paper. When the quilt is all done and put together, we now have to take all this paper out, which can kind of be quite a process, and it can be annoying. So I have 3 tools for this. I have tweezers, a seam ripper, and the purple thing, which some of you guys may have heard of. For pieces like this, and you have 2 different sections, you can just grab it and tear it off with your hands. The seam ripper is where you see there's paper in the seam allowance here, and since I basted it, which can be, I feel is very helpful for when you're sewing things together, it does make it more difficult to take the paper out. So before I take the paper out, I go through with my seam ripper, and I pull out some of that thread so that I can then tear that paper off. The purple thing, so if you have a block that was all one section, say this one, you might be like, well, how do I grab it? One thing that you can do is you can just take the purple thing and you can just sort of press down where the seam is. And you see how that tears it? And then I can pull these pieces out. If you don't have a purple thing, you can also just sort of press with your finger. This can also be helpful for corners here. You can pull it in the corner. The tweezers are good for smaller areas. So in here, it might be a little bit more difficult to pull these small pieces out. If you're gentle, you can use the tips of the tweezers to break the paper open and pull the pieces out. You want to be really careful when you use the tweezers to not pull on threads. I've accidentally pulled seams out that way. It did end up that the tension on my machine also wasn't right, but still, you want to be careful about that. And then one other thing that you want to be aware of, when you're pulling the paper out, if I have a seam here, if I pull away from that seam, the paper tears really easily. When you have something like this, where you have a seam crossing another seam, you do want to be careful. If I was pulling it from this side, you do want to be careful that you don't pull it in a way that might disturb that seam. So instead of pulling it this way, I would pull it down that way, just so that we don't accidentally take some of that thread off. Now, if you don't get every tiny little piece of paper out, if there are, like for example, like this, it's kind of not that big of a deal. I mean, you want to get as much paper out as possible, but a tiny piece like that probably isn't going to do much. I like to use newsprint because the newsprint tears out really easily. There were a few where I didn't realize that regular paper had been put in the printer. So here I have regular paper. It will still work, this is just printer paper. It just doesn't tear quite as easily. This process can usually take a while, so I usually like to sit down and relax and watch a TV show as I pull the paper out. All of the blocks are up on the website now, and I will be posting one more video about the finishing and quilting and backing for this quilt. If you have been doing this quilt along, I would love to see your quilt. Please send me an email, or if you want, I created a Facebook group for people who are working on my quilt patterns where you can go and you can ask questions and you can post pictures and whatnot. Once I get all this paper pulled out, I'll be back for another video about how to finish this quilt.